In a previous video, I talked about Artisan buttons, sliders, and alarms. And in this video, I want to focus on just the basics of alarms so that you can use this information to build alarms to do whatever you want to do within your roast. So let's get to it. We can get to alarms by either going to config alarms, or there is a keyboard shortcut. So I'm using a Mac, and so on the Mac it's Command A. This opens the alarm table, and you can see several columns here for each alarm. This first one is the alarm number. The second one is the status. If you uncheck on, the alarm will not trigger. Then we have if alarm or but not. So these are some conditional settings we can use. Then we have the from. So this says that for this rule, from the on event, which means once I've clicked the on button in Artisan, it will start evaluating these conditions. And I have it set to look at the bean temperature, and if it's above 200 degrees Celsius, the action to take is start. So that starts recording. The second alarm that I have set up is very similar to the first. So it's not conditional or guarded by any alarms. It's evaluated from the drop event. So whether the drop event is triggered automatically within Artisan, or if I click a button to mark the drop event, this alarm will then start evaluating, and it's going to trigger 15 seconds after the drop. It is not going to evaluate any curve data, and at 15 seconds after the drop, the action that it's going to take is it's going to shut off recording. Now there are a couple of key points to remember in regards to these alarms. The first point is that alarms are only triggered by time and curve data. Now this is something that tripped me up previously. I thought that events alone could trigger alarms, but they cannot. Alarms cannot be triggered by buttons or events directly. Now I'll show you a trick I use to trigger alarms by events. It's pretty easy actually. But you just need to remember that if you go in and set this to trigger from on and leave this time 0, and then you leave this blank, this alarm will never trigger. That's the hack. So the hack is, if you want to trigger at the on event regardless, you could set the BT source above 0. That way, as soon as the on event is triggered, if the bean temperature is above 0, the action will be taken. So that's a pretty cool little workaround. Another trick that you can do is you can save button or save alarm sets. So I'll show you. This is the set that I've been working on most recently, and it's pretty involved. So some of the things that I'm doing with these buttons is, like I said, I'm triggering the recording. I'm starting the recording. I also do some fan changes, power settings. So these two rules here, alarm number 4 and alarm number 5, drop the power down after charge to give me that dip in power to kind of let things settle out after I charge. So you can see that on charge, immediately start evaluating or immediately trigger the rule. This means that time is not considered. If the environment temp is above 0, drop the power to 50. So this is leveraging that hack I just told you about, where it is triggering the alarm on the event. And then the second rule takes advantage of the if alarm condition. So in Artisan they call that guarding. So this rule is guarded by alarm number 4. I keep calling them rules. I should call them alarms, which is what they are. Alarm number 5 is guarded by alarm number 4. So alarm 5 will only trigger after 4 has triggered. And in this case, I have it set if alarm is the from. So what that does is changes the context so that this time and this temperature are both evaluated from this point. So that's important, because this is not 30 seconds into the roast. This is 30 seconds after alarm 4 triggered. So if alarm 4 triggered at, we'll say, 3 minutes, and I have alarm 5 set to go 30 seconds here, it's 30 seconds after alarm 4. So that would be 3:30. Likewise, with the temperature, if I set this to evaluate, let's just say bean temp, and I set this at 10, that's what that alarm is saying is once, well, let's take this out so that we're not confusing the issue. So now what alarm 5 says is if alarm 4 has triggered 10 degrees above the temperature at which alarm 4 triggered, trigger number 5. So that's kind of an interesting condition that we can use here that changes the context of both the time and the temperature. Let's see, what's another rule that I can talk about here? This is another interesting rule that I have set up. I'm not sure what version this was introduced, but I just found it myself. I use this rule to get my attention. I kind of use it as an alert. So when from the turning point, when the bean temperature is above 178 degrees, I set the canvas color to this gray. What that does is when the bean temp goes over 178, the entire background of the of Artisan changes color, goes to a darker gray. And that, I'm using that in this scenario to let me know that I'm getting close to 180 degrees Celsius on the bean temp. And for me, that gets my attention to the fact that the beans are about to go exothermic. So that's one of the things that Carl Staub talks about, is that around 180 degrees at the environment temp, the beans have reached a point where they're going to go exothermic. And that's important for roasters to know, because that's another heat source for your environment. And if you don't compensate for it, it can increase the temperature, and it will possibly cause a flick on your rate of change, which is an increase in your rate of change. You typically want your rate of change to be a steady decline going down, and if you get that flick up, you could negatively impact the bean flavor, the coffee flavor later. So this alarm just gets my attention to the fact that we are near 178 degrees, or we're near 180 degrees Celsius, and that just makes sure that I am paying attention to that specific thing. And then at 180 degrees, I reset the canvas color. You could also do a pop-up. So you can do a pop-up with messages, and this is something that I've done before as well. So I have these alarms set up. They're all set up for Fahrenheit temperatures. I haven't changed them for Celsius. But this alarm set, as I'm going through the roast, will pop up various messages for me. So they're messages from me to me. One of the reasons I don't necessarily care for the pop-ups is because you have to acknowledge the pop-up to get it out of your way. With the canvas color change, I don't have to acknowledge it. I don't have to do anything about it. It's all automatic. So for that reason, I prefer the color change, at least for the one event. Now you can do multiple different colors for multiple different events if you want. This, I just used this gray because it was in one of the examples that I found on Artisan blog. So that brings me to the other thing I wanted to share with you. I will link these blog posts in the video description. These are 3 different blog posts that I found very useful in learning about and devising alarms. So the first one is this page, this article written in 2013 about alarms. This is a very good overview. This is a lot of the information I've already given you now. The second article is this one, More Alarms. This one was written in 2016 and gives you some different examples of some maybe more advanced ways to use the alarms. And then this is from 2019, I believe. Yeah, 2019. And the page is not only dedicated to alarms. There's a lot more going on in here. This is a pretty useful page. But there is a section about alarms that does give some useful information. So I hope that gets you started on configuring some alarms in your Artisan setup so that you can focus more on the roast, the actual roast, and less on tinkering with Artisan software. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below as always, and watch for more videos.